When I think about my marriage to Samantha, what strikes me is how perfect it all seemed for those 5 years. We were college sweethearts with big dreams, a beautiful home, and what I thought was unshakable trust. Then came that Tuesday afternoon, when I walked in on her with my close friend. Something inside me just snapped. I made a decision most people would call extreme. I disappeared completely. New state, new job, new identity. But even after all these years, Samantha keeps trying to find me, desperate for a second chance I will never give her. Before I take you through the heartbreak that led to my disappearing act, and the peace I found after, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. Hit subscribe if you want more stories about finding strength after betrayal. I met Samantha during my junior year at University of Michigan. I was studying mechanical engineering and focused almost entirely on my coursework. My roommate dragged me to a house party one Friday night, insisting I needed to have some kind of social life. That is where I saw her for the first time, laughing with friends in the kitchen. She had this infectious laugh that made everyone around her smile. When our eyes met, something just clicked. We started dating that weekend, and for the next 2 years we were inseparable. She was studying education, planning to become an elementary school teacher. We would stay up late, studying together her lesson plans. Spread out on one side of the table, my engineering textbooks on the other. We talked endlessly about our future, the life we would build together once we graduated. I proposed on graduation day. It was not fancy, just a simple ring I had saved up for with my part-time job earnings. We got married 6 months later in a small ceremony with close friends and family. Both sets of parents helped us with the down payment on a modest starter home in a nice neighborhood outside Detroit. Everything seemed to be falling into place perfectly. I landed a position at Davidson Engineering, a respected firm that specialized in automotive components. The pay was excellent, but the job demanded long hours and occasional travel. Samantha found work at a local elementary school teaching 3rd grade. She absolutely loved her students and would come home with stories about them every day. For the first 3 years, we were living our dream. We talked about starting a family once we had been in our careers for 5 years. We wanted to be financially stable and settled before bringing children into our lives. Our 5th wedding anniversary was approaching, and conversations about trying for a baby were becoming more frequent. Then things started to change subtly. I first noticed it when Samantha began guarding her phone. She had always left it face up on the coffee table or kitchen counter before, but suddenly she kept it with her constantly. If I walked into the room while she was texting, she would quickly lock the screen. When I asked who she was talking to, the answer was always vague. Just a colleague, just a friend, nothing important. She started staying out later, claiming teachers' meetings and happy hours with coworkers. New friends I had never met were suddenly regular fixtures in her stories. I noticed her dressing differently too, putting more effort into her appearance on ordinary weekdays. Something felt off, but I dismissed my suspicions. I trusted her completely. We had built our relationship on honesty after all. I was scheduled to be in Chicago for a week in May, overseeing the installation of components we had designed for a new production line. 2 days before our anniversary, I decided to surprise her by coming home early. I had arranged with her principal to pull her out of class for lunch. I had flowers reservations at her favorite restaurant, and a beautiful necklace I had picked out months earlier. When I turned onto our street around 11 in the morning, I noticed an unfamiliar car in our driveway. Actually, that is not entirely true. The car was familiar. It belonged to Ryan, a friend I had known since college who had recently moved to our area. We had helped him settle in, invited him over for dinner numerous times, introduced him to our social circle. He had become a regular presence in our lives over the past 8 months. My initial thought was innocent enough. Maybe Ryan was dropping something off, or perhaps Samantha had taken a personal day and they were meeting for coffee. It was only when I opened the front door that the reality began to take shape. There was a trail of discarded clothing from the entryway toward our bedroom upstairs. A man's jacket I recognized as Ryan's. Samantha's cardigan. More items leading up the stairs. I remember every second of walking up those stairs. Each step felt like moving through concrete. I could hear them before I saw them. The sounds from our bedroom left no room for innocent explanations. When I pushed open the door, they did not notice me at first. It took a few seconds before Samantha looked up and saw me standing there. Her face transformed instantly from pleasure to horror. Ryan scrambled off her, grabbing at sheets, stammering something unintelligible. Samantha just froze her eyes, wide mouth open, but no words coming out. I stood there for what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds. The strangest part was my reaction. I felt oddly calm on the outside while everything inside me was collapsing. I did not yell. I did not cry. I simply turned around and walked back down the stairs and out the front door. I got in my car and drove away, hearing Samantha calling my name from the doorway as I pulled out of the driveway. I checked into a hotel downtown and turned off my phone. When I finally turned it on the next morning, there were 37 missed calls from Samantha, 15 from Ryan, and dozens of text messages. The messages ranged from desperate apologies to implausible explanations. It was the first time. It did not mean anything. It was a mistake. She loved me. She was sorry. Over the next few days, I conducted my own investigation. I logged into our shared cloud account, where Samantha's phone backed up automatically something she had apparently forgotten. The messages between her and Ryan went back 7 months. They had been sleeping together in our bed while I was on business trips. There were explicit photos, intimate conversations, plans for their next encounters. Even more devastating were the messages I found between Samantha and her friends complaining about how boring I had become, how my work schedule left her feeling neglected. In one particularly painful exchange, she joked that Ryan knew how to make her happy in ways I never could. I also found credit card statements showing dinners, hotel rooms, and expensive gifts Samantha had bought for Ryan using our joint account. Money we had been saving for our future, for the children we had planned to have. For an entire week, I isolated myself in that hotel room, emerging only for food and necessities. My phone continued to buzz with Samantha's attempts to contact me, but I remained silent. On the 8th day, I called Mike, a law school friend who specialized in divorce cases. We met for lunch and I laid out my situation. Mike walked me through the typical divorce process, explaining how assets would likely be divided given our 5 years of marriage and roughly equal incomes. As he spoke, I realized I wanted more than just legal separation from Samantha. The thought of drawn-out divorce proceedings, mediation sessions, and potentially seeing her regularly made me physically ill. I needed a complete break, a clean slate. That afternoon, I began researching jobs in my field across the country. Seattle had a booming tech scene with several engineering firms that could use my expertise. I updated my resume using my full legal name, Daniel James Thompson, rather than the Danny Thompson everyone knew me as. I submitted applications to 5 companies and received interest from 3 within days. While waiting for interview arrangements, I dug deeper into Samantha's betrayal. What I discovered shattered any lingering doubts about my decision to leave. She had been inviting Ryan to family gatherings when I was traveling for work. There were photos of them with my parents at a dinner I had missed due to a last-minute business trip. My own family had unwittingly welcomed my wife's lover into their home. Even more painful was learning through subtle questioning of mutual friends that several people in our social circle knew about the affair. Some had seen them together at restaurants across town. Others had noticed their obvious connection at parties. No one had told me. I had been the oblivious husband, the last to know about my own wife's infidelity. With each new revelation, my resolve strengthened. I opened new bank accounts at a national bank, ensuring I could access my funds from anywhere. I meticulously calculated our joint assets and transferred exactly half to my new private account, leaving her share untouched. I was angry, but I would not be vindictive. I began selling my personal possessions quietly. My golf clubs went to a colleague, my collection of engineering books to a recent graduate, my tools to a neighbor. I kept only what would fit in my car. Each sale was conducted in cash to avoid creating electronic records of my activities. My final step before leaving was writing a letter to Samantha. After several drafts, I settled on just 5 words. I know everything. Don't. Look for me. I placed the letter on our kitchen table alongside my wedding ring. 15 days after discovering the affair, I left Detroit before dawn. I drove west with only the essentials, stopping only for fuel and brief rests. I reached Seattle 3 days later, exhausted but determined. I had secured a small furnished apartment through an online rental agency, paying 3 months in advance with cash. The first steps in creating my new identity were physical. I grew a beard for the first time in my life. I changed my hairstyle from the short, neat cut I had worn for years to something longer and less structured. I bought a completely different style of clothing, abandoning the business casual wardrobe I had maintained throughout my professional life. I also began exclusively using my middle name James in professional and social settings. It was not illegal as it was part of my legal name, but it created enough separation from my former life to feel like a fresh start. I avoided all social media platforms and kept my online presence minimal. I used cash for purchases whenever possible to reduce digital footprints. I even bought a basic prepaid phone for everyday use, keeping my original phone powered off and stored away for emergencies only. The emotional toll of erasing my old identity was immense. There were nights I woke up disoriented, momentarily forgetting where I was and why. Dreams about Samantha plagued me for months, though they gradually became less frequent. I questioned my decision often during those early days, wondering if I had overreacted or if I should have stayed to fight for my marriage. But each time doubt crept in, I would remember the images of them together in our bed, the messages they had exchanged, the betrayal, by not just my wife, but also people I had considered friends. The pain would resurface, reinforcing my conviction that I had made the necessary choice for my own survival. I secured a position at Westridge Engineering, a mid-sized firm specializing in sustainable building systems. The work challenged me in ways my previous job had not, pushing me to expand my skills and knowledge. My colleagues were welcoming, and I gradually began forming genuine connections, though I remained guarded about my past. After 6 months, I felt settled enough to establish some routines. I joined a local gym, found a favorite coffee shop, and even began volunteering at a weekend community garden project. I was careful to share only vague details about my life before Seattle, crafting a simple narrative about seeking a fresh start after a difficult divorce. It was close enough to the truth to be comfortable, but distant enough to protect my privacy. By my 3rd year in Seattle, I had created a life that felt genuinely mine. I had been promoted twice at Westridge, earning the respect of my peers and supervisors. My apartment had transformed from a temporary landing spot to a real home filled with books and music and the small comforts that make a space personal. I had developed friendships with several colleagues, though I maintained certain boundaries. No social media connections, no sharing of contact information beyond my current phone number, no detailed discussions of my past. They accepted these quirks as part of my personality, respecting my privacy, without pressing for explanations. It was during this period of stability that I met Rachel. She was a graphic designer who frequented the same coffee shop where I spent Saturday mornings reading engineering journals. We exchanged smiles for weeks before she finally approached my table, commenting on an article about sustainable architecture I was reading. Our conversation flowed easily, jumping from professional interests to favorite books to travel aspirations. She gave me her number written on a napkin, a gesture so charmingly old-fashioned, it made me smile for days afterward. I waited 3 days before calling her, partly out of rusty dating protocol, partly out of lingering fear about connecting too deeply with someone new. Our first date was a walking tour of local architectural landmarks, followed by dinner at a small Italian restaurant. Rachel was intelligent, creative, and refreshingly direct. She asked questions about my work, my interests, my thoughts on everything from politics to art. She shared stories of her childhood in Oregon, her decision to pursue design, her close relationship with her brother and parents. When the inevitable questions about my past arose, I navigated them carefully. I mentioned growing up in Michigan, studying engineering, moving to Seattle for a fresh start after a relationship ended badly. She seemed to sense my reluctance to elaborate and didn't push further. Instead, she focused on who I was now, the person sitting across from her, rather than the history that had shaped me. Over the next 8 months, our relationship developed with a natural ease that surprised me. We spent weekends exploring the city, taking day trips to nearby mountains, cooking elaborate meals in my apartment. I found myself laughing more than I had in years, experiencing a lightness I had forgotten was possible. As our connection deepened, The weight of my secrets became increasingly uncomfortable. Rachel shared herself so openly, while I maintained careful boundaries around my past. The disparity felt dishonest, a poor foundation for something I was beginning to value deeply. Then 18 months after my disappearance, the first attempt to find me occurred. A former colleague from Davidson Engineering emailed my emergency address warning that a private investigator had been asking questions about me showing my photo around the office. The investigator had claimed to be working on behalf of a family member concerned about my welfare, but my colleague recognized Samantha's name when it was mentioned. The news triggered an anxiety I thought I had overcome. I changed my routine, immediately avoiding my usual coffee shop and gym for several weeks. I scoured local areas where I frequently visited, watching for unfamiliar faces that lingered too long. I considered moving again, perhaps to Portland or San Francisco, but ultimately decided against uprooting the life I had carefully built. The investigator apparently lost my trail as no further reports came from my Detroit connections. I began to relax again, settling back into my routines with Rachel, though with heightened awareness of my surroundings. 6 months later, the second search attempt surfaced. A mutual friend from college forwarded a link to a Facebook page titled, "Help Find Danny Thompson." The page, created by Samantha, featured our wedding photo and a heartfelt plea describing me as her beloved husband who had disappeared under concerning circumstances. She claimed to be worried about my mental health, suggesting I might have experienced a breakdown. The comment section was filled with supportive messages from people who had never known the truth of our marriage. Some offered prayers, others shared the post to extend its reach. A few suggested locations I might have gone, based on interests I had once mentioned, or places I had expressed desire to visit. The public nature of this search attempt left me feeling exposed and misrepresented. Samantha's portrayal of herself as the concerned, loving wife, seeking her troubled husband, was so far from reality. It made me physically ill. Yet I could not defend myself without revealing my location. It was this second attempt that finally pushed me to share my truth with Rachel. We had been dating nearly a year, and my feelings for her had grown into something I could no longer deny was love. She deserved honesty before deciding whether to continue our relationship. One evening after dinner at her apartment, I told her everything. The discovery of the affair, the extent of the betrayal, my decision to disappear completely, rather than face a messy divorce and continued connection to Samantha. I showed her the Help Find Danny page, explaining the false narrative it presented. I braced myself for shocked judgment, perhaps even anger at my deception. Instead, Rachel listened with quiet attention, asking occasional clarifying questions, but mostly just allowing me to share the full story I had kept buried for so long. When I finished, her response was simple. "Thank you for trusting me with this. I can't imagine how difficult that must have been for you." Her acceptance and understanding washed over me like a healing wave. For the first time since discovering Samantha's betrayal, I felt truly seen and accepted. The third search attempt came during the holiday season of my 4th year away. My mother called to tell me that Samantha had appeared at their house during a family gathering. She had brought gifts and tears, claiming she had never stopped looking for me, never stopped loving me. She told my parents she had made terrible mistakes, but had changed and deserved another chance to make things right. My parents, who knew only that wed separated after she had cheated, were uncomfortable but polite. They maintained they had no contact information for me beyond an email address I checked infrequently for family emergencies. Samantha's persistence troubled them enough to warn me, breaking their promise not to discuss my whereabouts with anyone. The increasing frequency and desperation of Samantha's attempts to find me suggested her motivation went beyond mere guilt or closure. There was something almost obsessive in her pursuit, a refusal to accept that some betrayals cannot be undone, some relationships cannot be repaired. Then came the certified letter, somehow finding its way to my Seattle address. I never discovered how she found me, whether through the private investigator finally succeeding, or perhaps through some careless digital footprint I had left behind. The letter contained 8 pages of handwritten pleas for forgiveness, declarations of continued love, and arguments for why I should allow her back into my life. After 4 years of silence, I made the difficult decision to finally respond to Samantha. Not out of any desire for reconciliation, but to definitively close this chapter and stop her persistent pursuit. With Rachel's support and advice from a lawyer, I arranged a secure video call through my attorney as intermediary. I prepared meticulously for the conversation, rehearsing what I would and would not say. Rachel sat nearby during the call off camera, but present as my emotional support. When Samantha's face appeared on screen, the shock of seeing her after so many years hit harder than I had anticipated. She looked essentially the same, yet somehow fundamentally different from the woman I had loved. Her reaction to seeing me was immediate tears. She launched into what felt like a rehearsed speech about how much she had changed, how deeply she regretted her actions, how not a day went by that she did not think of me and wish for another chance. She spoke about therapy and personal growth, about lessons learned and insights gained. I listened without interrupting, allowing her the space to say everything she had apparently been holding on to for years. When she finished, I responded calmly but firmly. I acknowledged our shared history and the pain of how it ended. I expressed hope that she had indeed found healing and growth, but I was clear that there was no possibility of reconciliation or renewed contact. What she said next revealed much about her motivations. She explained that she and Ryan had broken up just months after I left their relationship crumbling under the weight of guilt and mutual distrust. She had dated several men since then, but each relationship had failed. She was still living in our old house, still teaching at the same school, still friends with the same people who had known about her affair, and said nothing. As she spoke, I recognized that her pursuit was less about love for me and more about her inability to move forward. I had become a fixation, the one who got away, the relationship she could not control or conclude on her terms. When I shared briefly about my new life, my happiness and my relationship with Rachel, Samantha's demeanor shifted noticeably. Her expressions of remorse transformed into flashes of anger. She accused me of selfishness for disappearing, for not giving her the opportunity to make amends, for moving on while she remained trapped in the past. It was a watershed moment. Watching her reaction, I realized I was completely emotionally free from her. The woman on the screen stirred no feelings in me beyond a distant compassion for someone unable to release her grip on a relationship long dead. I ended the call with a firm but compassionate final request. Please respect that this chapter of our lives is closed. I wish you healing and happiness, but that needs to happen without any further contact between us. My lawyer has prepared a formal cease and desist letter that will be delivered tomorrow. Please honor it. In the months following that conversation, I experienced an unexpected sense of closure. The weight I had carried even while building my new life finally lifted completely. Rachel remarked on the change, saying, "I seemed lighter, more present, fully engaged in our shared future, rather than still partially tethered to my past." 6 months after the video call, I proposed to Rachel during a weekend trip to Mount Rainier. The ring was nothing like the one I had given Samantha years earlier. I had designed it with a local jeweler, incorporating elements that reflected Rachel's artistic sensibility and our shared aesthetic. When she said yes, the joy I felt contained no shadows, no reservations, no lingering ghosts. We married in a small ceremony with close friends and Rachel's family. 1 year later, we welcomed our daughter Lily, a bright, curious child who became the center of our world. We moved from my apartment to a house with a garden where Rachel could plant flowers and I could build a workshop for weekend projects. Looking back on the journey that brought me here, I recognized that my decision to disappear completely was not about punishing Samantha, though she experienced it that way. It was about self-preservation. Some betrayals cut too deeply for conventional healing. Some breaks require radical solutions. I learned that walking away entirely was the only path to finding myself again. Not the Danny who existed in relation to Samantha and our shared social circle, but the person I was at my core, the one who could build something authentic and lasting with Rachel. The most profound lesson was understanding that your worth is not determined by someone else's betrayal. Their actions reflect their character, not your value. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away completely and create space for something better to enter your life. Have you ever had to make a clean break to save yourself? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more journeys of finding strength after betrayal. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message, share this video with them. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, sometimes what feels like an ending is actually the beginning of your best chapter.